For 8 centuries, medieval monastery gardens sustained Europe by employing a method that contemporary agriculture intentionally discarded. Monks cultivated crops once and reaped them for decades, with a single planting providing sustenance for 20 years, sometimes even longer. These were not mere stories. They were verifiable practices, documented in texts such as Charlemagne's Capitularies from 800 AD. Yet, within 50 years, this knowledge vanished. Not because the plants ceased to be productive, but because they afforded farmers too much autonomy. Presently, 95% of vegetables necessitate annual replanting. You sow, harvest, and repurchase seeds every single year. However, medieval farmers planted asparagus once and supplied communities for a quarter century. They nurtured good King Henry near their homes and gathered greens for decades. This wisdom was never lost. It was intentionally concealed. Perennial vegetables do not foster dependence. Instead, they cultivate liberation. Before we uncover these 7 forgotten crops, please share in the comments. Have you ever cultivated perennial vegetables? Do you acquire seeds annually? Let's begin. Asparagus. A single planting yields for 25 years. The Romans had been cultivating asparagus as early as 200 BC, establishing fleets to transport spears from the Tiber to the Alps, where it was preserved by freezing for 6 months until the Feast of Epicurus. Emperor Augustus famously characterized urgent tasks as being quicker than you can cook asparagus. Upon the collapse of Rome, asparagus nearly disappeared, but medieval monks safeguarded it through the Dark Ages within their monastery gardens. By 1469, asparagus beds were customary in French monasteries, and the cultivation technique gradually disseminated to England by 1538 and Germany by 1542, reintroduced through monastic trade routes. The method's brilliance lies in its execution. In the first year, you plant crowns in deeply prepared beds, refraining from harvesting anything during the first and second years. These initial years are crucial for the crowns to establish root systems reaching 10 feet deep, which will sustain decades of production. In the third year, you can begin to cut spears for a period of 6 to 8 weeks each spring, when they emerge 6 to 8 inches tall and before their tips unfurl. Following this cutting period, you cease harvesting and allow the remaining spears to develop into feathery fronds that photosynthesize and store energy for the subsequent year. These same crowns will continue to produce for 15 years, often 20, and sometimes 25 years or even more. The National Allotment Society confirms a standard lifespan of 15 to 25 years. A 40-foot row can yield 10 to 25 pounds per season for 25 years from just one planting, totaling 250 to 625 pounds of asparagus from a single planting event. Attempt to match that with annual vegetables. You would need to replant tomatoes 25 times to achieve an equivalent number of production years. Medieval asparagus possessed qualities that modern commercial varieties have forfeited: intense flavor and a higher nutrient density. Its deep roots drew minerals from 10 feet underground, and its slower growth resulted in denser, more flavorful spears. Varieties were selected for taste, not for durability during shipping. Modern asparagus is cultivated for uniformity, rapid growth, and survival during cross-country transport, whereas medieval asparagus was grown to nourish communities. Industrial farming ultimately undermined asparagus cultivation for one primary reason. A 3-year period without income is deemed unacceptable. Annual crops yield in the first year, allowing for annual seed sales, yearly fertilizer charges, and the creation of annual dependency. Asparagus, however, fosters independence. Plant once, harvest for 25 years. That equates to 25 years where you are not purchasing seeds and are not reliant on corporations. Medieval monks planted asparagus for their grandchildren to harvest. Modern agriculture plants for quarterly profits. Good King Henry, also known as the spinach that never dies, possesses a name rooted in fairy tales and history. Some attribute its name to a German king, while others contend Good Henry was a Saxon elf, distinct from Bad Henry, a nearby poisonous plant. The king designation appeared later in English, its origin unknown. What we do know is that Good King Henry sustained medieval peasants as a staple, not a delicacy, from the 12th to the 16th centuries. Historical cookbooks identify it as a common ingredient in medieval vegetable soups during this period, often combined with leeks, chard, and bread in nutrient-rich broths that supported farmers through winters, famines, and plagues. Medieval families planted it near their back doors, not in distant garden plots, for immediate cooking access. A single planting yielded greens from early spring through late summer, year after year, with no need for replanting. In Lincolnshire, England, it was so ubiquitous that locals referred to it as Lincolnshire spinach. Almost every cottage had a patch in warm, well-manured corners. It provided abundant, delectable vegetables weeks before regular asparagus arrived, and continued weeks afterward. People reportedly preferred it to asparagus. The plant's ingenuity lies in its 3 distinctive harvests from one perennial. Spring yields thick young shoots, which are cut underground like asparagus and prepared similarly, boiled and served with butter on toast, constituting the first harvest. As the plant matures, the second harvest begins, offering triangular dark green leaves picked throughout spring and summer, used like spinach, boiled, sautéed, or added to soups, with young leaves being optimal. Later in the summer, the third harvest arrives, flowering shoots producing small green buds that are cooked like broccoli. 3 crops from a single perennial. Botanical studies indicate that 30 plants can supply enough for 4 people, equating to roughly 7.5 plants per person for a lifetime of greens. Compare this to spinach, which necessitates replanting every few weeks for continuous yield and constant seed purchases. However, its nutritional profile highlights the true distinction. Good King Henry boasts higher iron, calcium, vitamin C, and protein than modern spinach. Its perennial roots delve 3 to 5 feet deep, extracting minerals from depths unattainable by annual spinach roots, which only reach 18 inches. It acts as a dynamic accumulator. Deep roots pull nutrients from subsoil, and when leaves fall and decompose, they enrich the topsoil. It not only nourishes you, but also the soil. So, why did it vanish? Spinach became fashionable in the 17th century. Annual spinach proved easier for seed companies to sell annually. Good King Henry rendered farmers too self-sufficient. One cannot profit from plants that last indefinitely. By the 20th century, it had nearly disappeared from cultivation. Medieval peasants planted it by their doors and never worried about greens again. Modern gardeners buy spinach seeds every spring. Salsify, the sweet root coveted by royalty. In 1682, John Whirlidge proclaimed it the sweetest, whitest, most pleasant of roots, and he was not overstating its value. This perennial root was so esteemed that King Henry IV of England maintained specialized gardens solely dedicated to its cultivation. Not mixed plots, but exclusive salsify gardens, a testament to its immense worth. Even further back, Roman Emperor Tiberius relished it so much that he demanded it as tribute from Germany. By medieval times, salsify was a European staple. The Dutch referred to it as Zoete Wortel, and Germans as Zuckerwurzel, both translating to sugar root. Before the advent of sugar from cane and beets, salsify served as a primary source of sweetness. Consider this: medieval honey was costly, and sugar was exotic and rare. But salsify provided a perpetually renewable sweetness source from a single planting. Its roots taste like a cross between parsnip and carrot, with hints of vanilla, offering natural sweetness without processing. Medieval cultivation practices were as follows. Salsify was planted in the first year from seed or root divisions. Roots in the first year were small and edible, but not particularly impressive. While they could be harvested, shrewd farmers often waited. By the second year, the roots grew sweet, thick, and highly productive, forming pencil-thin white root clusters, each 6 to 8 inches long, emerging from the base like sweet potatoes. The plant then produced indefinitely. Each year, roots were harvested, ensuring enough remained to regrow. Some farmers documented improved yields in the second year, continuing thereafter. Medieval cooks prepared salsify in every conceivable manner: boiled with butter and herbs, the simplest preparation, roasted with olive oil, parboiled and deep-fried, and incorporated into both sweet and savory pies. One medieval cookbook instructs frying salsify in oil or butter, a dish popular throughout the Tudor and Stuart periods until the 1750s. Nutritionally, salsify surpasses potatoes in nearly all aspects: higher vitamin content, superior minerals, and a lower glycemic index, meaning no blood sugar spikes typical of starchy potatoes. Crucially, it is perennial, whereas potatoes die yearly and require replanting. So why did salsify vanish by the late 1700s? The arrival of potatoes from the Americas. They were simpler to prepare, just peel and boil, offered higher yields per square foot, and were novel and fashionable. Most significantly for seed vendors, potatoes are annual, necessitating yearly replanting using saved or newly purchased seed potatoes. Lovage. 2 decades of extraordinary celery. Picture a plant soaring to 6 feet, annually yielding colossal quantities of intensely flavored leaves, and enduring for 20 years or more. That encapsulates lovage. Medieval monasteries cultivated it in their physic gardens, primarily for its remarkable versatility. Every part of the plant is beneficial. Its leaves, reminiscent of celery but with 10 times the intensity, were utilized fresh or dried to season soups, stocks, sauces, and stews. A single sprig could flavor an entire pot of soup for 50 monks, a testament to its potency. Its thick, hollow stems were harvested young and candied, serving as sweet treats. While celery-flavored candy might seem peculiar to modern tastes, medieval Europeans savored it. The seeds, which ripened in late summer, were ground to impart flavor to bread and cheese. The substantial, fleshy roots, akin to carrots, were boiled and consumed as vegetables. One plant provided 4 distinct foods: leaves, stems, seeds, and roots, all from a perennial that produced for 2 decades. 13th century monastic records detail lovage tea as a remedy for stomach ailments and kidney complaints, highlighting its role not just as food, but as medicine. The entire plant contains essential oils that aid digestion, reduce bloating, and act as a mild diuretic. Medieval monks employed it to treat themselves and local communities who sought healing at monasteries. Romans knew lovage as lusticum, possibly because it grew abundantly in Liguria, Italy, and they used it extensively in their cooking. Upon the fall of Rome, like many beneficial plants, lovage primarily survived within monastery gardens. By medieval times, lovage was a standard fixture in monastery gardens across Europe, holding a distinguished place in these plots. Every monastery contained at least a few plants, often more, due to its consistent demand. Fresh leaves for culinary use, dried leaves for medicinal purposes, candied stems for confectionery, seeds for baking, and roots as winter vegetables. Let's delve into the economic aspect. A mature lovage plant can reach a height of 6 feet and spread 3 feet wide, yielding substantial quantities of leaves annually. In medieval times, a single sprig was sufficient to flavor an entire pot of food. One plant could provide seasoning for family meals for many decades. To emulate the 20-year output of a single lovage plant, you would need to purchase celery weekly for 2 decades. At a cost of $2 per bunch, this equates to over $2,000 for celery over 20 years. Alternatively, you could spend a mere $8 once for lovage roots, plant them, and enjoy harvests for 20 years. Consider rhubarb, a plant capable of outliving its planter. A true account from a gardener illustrates this. My parents had a rhubarb plant at the old homestead that my grandmother planted. It must be 50 years old and is still producing after 50 years from a single planting. That's not an exaggeration. That's rhubarb. Medieval Europeans primarily valued rhubarb roots for their therapeutic qualities. Originating in Asia, rhubarb root was an expensive imported medicine for centuries, used as a laxative and digestive aid. By the 16th century, Europeans discovered that the tart stalks were edible, unlike the leaves which contain toxic levels of oxalic acid. Once this culinary application became widespread, rhubarb became a European dietary staple. The remarkable quality of rhubarb lies in its almost indestructible nature. Plant a crown in fertile, well-prepared soil with abundant sunlight. Refrain from harvesting in the first year to allow it to establish deep roots. In the second year, undertake a light harvest of a few stalks, permitting the plant to continue gaining strength. By the third year, the plant will be mature and capable of heavy harvesting. It can then yield 5 to 10 pounds of edible stalks per season for decades, and under optimal conditions, 50 years or more from a single planting. The National Allotment Society typically cites a lifespan of 10 to 20 years, yet gardeners frequently report plants outliving those who planted them. Rhubarb tolerates extreme cold and actually requires chilly winters to flourish. The plant completely dies back in winter, with all above-ground growth wilting. Then, in spring, as soil temperatures rise, thick shoots emerge from the crown and rapidly develop into substantial stalks. It is virtually indestructible once established. Rhubarb withstands drought, thrives on neglect, and rarely suffers from pests and diseases. Why did rhubarb endure, while many other perennials vanished? Because it possesses a distinct flavor profile that is difficult to replicate. Too unique to eliminate, its tart, fruity, and complex taste is unlike anything else. Furthermore, it requires such minimal care that even contemporary gardeners unfamiliar with perennial systems can keep it alive. However, modern gardeners often overlook that medieval rhubarb cultivation was integrated into a sophisticated system. Monasteries planted rhubarb alongside asparagus, good King Henry, lovage, skirret, and other perennials. They designed gardens for multi-generational productivity. A single planting sustained decades of monks. Modern gardeners plant rhubarb and then surround it with annuals that perish each year, failing to recognize the historical pattern that medieval monks understood. Artichokes offer infinite production through division. Artichokes have been cultivated in Sicily since classical Greece. The Greeks referred to them as cactos and consumed both the leaves and flower heads, which had already been improved through cultivation from their wild forms. The Romans called this vegetable cardus, giving us the related plant cardoon. However, the artichoke as we know it was refined during medieval times. By the 12th century, artichokes were mentioned in Ibn al-Awam's comprehensive farming guide in Seville. Muslim Spain and the Maghreb appear to have been centers for significant improvements in cultivated forms during the medieval period. Hildegard von Bingen, the renowned 12th century German abbess, herbalist, and mystic, documented artichoke cultivation in monastery gardens for both sustenance and medicine. By medieval times, artichokes were firmly established in monastery and palace gardens across southern Europe. Here's the perennial enchantment. In the first year, you plant crowns or starts and abstain from harvesting. The plant establishes itself, growing large, silvery green leaves and developing robust root systems. In the second year, the plant matures and begins to produce edible flower buds, which we know as artichokes. Each plant yields up to 12 large flower buds per summer. From year 2 through year 8, the plant continues its production. Every summer, 12 edible buds per plant. If left unharvested, they blossom into striking purple thistle flowers that attract pollinators. However, most gardeners harvest the buds when they are still tightly closed, steaming them to consume the fleshy scale bases and tender heart. After year 8, the rosette cluster becomes crowded, and the size and quality of the heads diminish. This is when most gardeners typically give up and replant. Yet medieval farmers possessed greater knowledge. When the original plant declines after 4 to 8 years, it is dug up and divided into 3 to 5 new plants. These divisions, known as offsets, originate from roots around the main clump's base. The offsets, each with a section of root attached, are separated and planted as new artichoke plants. These divisions effectively reset the clock. They are essentially new plants that will produce for another 4 to 8 years before requiring division again, providing virtually infinite production from a sole initial planting through continuous propagation. Medieval monasteries sustained artichoke patches for generations using this division technique. An initial planting could be divided and subdivided indefinitely. The expertise regarding when to divide, how to separate offsets without damage, and how to replant for optimal growth was passed down from older monks to younger ones. Artichokes have survived industrial agriculture partly due to their high commercial value and distinctive flavor. Even industrial farms could not completely replace them. However, most modern production treats artichokes as short-term crops, frequently replanting instead of managing them as the perennials they naturally are. Horseradish, the root that resists eradication. The National Allotment Society cautions gardeners about horseradish with 5 concise words. Hard to remove once in. This is not a jest. It is a serious warning. Horseradish is so perennial, so tenacious, so impossible to obliterate that medieval gardeners strategically planted it in monastery garden corners where no other plants would thrive. Poor soil? Plant horseradish. It flourishes. Shade? Horseradish is indifferent. Drought? It endures. Neglect? It spreads. You plant a horseradish root cutting just once, a mere 6-inch root piece, inserted into the ground at a 45-degree angle. Then it grows eternally. Annually, you can harvest thick, pungent roots and grate them fresh for an intense antibacterial condiment that clears sinuses and awakens taste buds. Medieval herbalists utilized horseradish for both culinary and medicinal purposes. Fresh roots were grated for flavor, preserved in vinegar for winter storage, and used medicinally for respiratory ailments, as a digestive aid, and as a poultice for joint pain. An established horseradish plant spreads aggressively. Its roots delve deep and wide, sending up new shoots in expanding circles. Every root piece remaining in the soil during harvest has the potential to grow into a new plant. This is why gardeners are advised to contain it, either by planting it in a buried pot or using root barriers. Otherwise, horseradish will colonize the garden. The challenge is not in getting horseradish to produce, but in containing it. Medieval gardeners employed this aggressive nature strategically. They planted horseradish in garden corners, in poor soil along walls, and in areas where cultivated vegetables struggled. Horseradish filled these spaces, providing pungent roots year after year with no maintenance. Why did horseradish survive when numerous other perennials disappeared? Because it is literally almost impossible to kill. Even industrial agriculture conceded defeat in attempts to eradicate horseradish from farms. Plow it under and it regrows. Spray it with herbicides and some roots persist. Pull it up and any soil fragments regenerate. Horseradish is a testament to perennial resilience. Medieval monks planted it once and harvested it as long as the monastery existed. Modern gardeners plant it, then panic when it spreads, only to realize they have inadvertently created a permanent food source, whether intended or not. That is the essence of perennials. Once established, they do not require your constant attention. They simply continue to produce. The vegetables that sustained medieval Europe for 800 years are still present. Asparagus, good King Henry, skirret, lovage, rhubarb, artichoke, horseradish. 7 crops, a single planting, yielding decades of harvests. Medieval monks planted these and nourished communities for generations. Modern agriculture plants annuals, fostering dependence on corporations. The choice is not between medieval and modern. It is between dependency and sovereignty. Every asparagus crown represents a 25-year declaration of independence. Every good King Henry plant by your door grants you freedom from purchasing spinach indefinitely. Every lovage plant in your garden provides 20 years of self-sufficient seasoning. Medieval farmers made their choice. They chose freedom. What will you choose? Subscribe, and let us continue unearthing what they buried. Comment below. Which perennial will you plant first? The knowledge was always accessible. Let us reclaim it.